Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Today we're going to be talking about something that goes deep into the universe, known as quantum physics. Sure, most of us have probably explored physics one way or the other to discover how we can find ourselves in reality. The question is, though, is how do we apply that in such a practical way that we can understand other ways that we can actually find the use of such a wonderful tool? Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is Dr. Yury Kronn. He is just that particular person who spent at least 10 years of his career at the top of his field in the research and application of what is known as laser physics. He was also asked by one of the leading scientists at the Institute of Radiotechnics and Electronics of the USSR Academy of Sciences to observe a series of experiments that indicated unexplained phenomena. Kind of curious about how we're going to talk about this today as we explore the seemingly unexplainable. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. Yury Kronn.
Hello.
Kronn, how are you
Daniel.
today?
I'm fine. Thank you for inviting me.
Really fascinating stuff here. Let's talk about kind of the direction that you're really putting your attention and your work into here.
Okay. I worked as a physicist for 25 years in Soviet Union, and then, I got interested in some phenomena which really puzzled many people. It's a phenomenon of so-called subtle energy. It's a modern name for what ancients called life force. We could observe these phenomena and how it affects human being and physical objects, but at the same time, we cannot measure it. And that's why science doesn't accept it. Actually, modern science thinks that it's just superstition of ancient cultures like Chinese acupuncturists and all this stuff, but we know that acupuncture is real. So 30 years ago, I got interested in this phenomena and start learning what ancient science says about this energy. And actually, we have very strange situation in our science right now. Before 20th century, all scientists believed in existence of, they called it ether, a pre-physical world, which consists of some kind of matter, has some kind of energy which affects physical world, because physical world is made from that pre-physical etheric matter. But then there was some experiments done which had a lot of different explanations, but our scientists chose explanation which was convenient, which denied the existence of this world. And now we have, our science discovered existence of so-called dark matter and dark energy, they called it. It is invisible and immeasurable energy and immeasurable matter, which is pre-physical, as our science agrees. It consists, according to our scientific, research, with some subatomic particles which are not known to our science. So, and what's the difference if we call it, etheric world or dark matter world? It is pre-physical world. It has some energy which affects us. So, what is that? And ancient cultures view it as energy penetrating all physical world, every beings, and affecting our lives.
It's pretty fascinating because I remember when I began to explore what I would consider the more novice approach of physics. My first book, for instance, was the classic by Fritjof Capra, simply titled The Tao of Physics, 1973. And I remember in the opening part of the book, he simply says, you don't need to be a scientist or even somebody who really knows physics to really explore what I'm going to present here today. But basically it was an exploration of how today's science is beginning to prove, in the best way that it knows how, what ancient civilizations had known for centuries. So, as I heard you talk about the fact that, when you take a look at ancient cultures and how they were able to view and understand these things at metaphysical and beyond levels, we take a look at today and how we've been able to create these tools to measure the reality that we're searching for. There was a time, for instance, we thought the atom was the smallest thing ever discoverable. Then it moved to the quark, and now it's even gotten smaller, and it seems the more we explore physics,
that's right,
and the reality of what we would call solid known objects, the more elusive it becomes. And it's really fascinating to think about all of this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But ancients not only, knew about it, as you mentioned, for centuries, but they practically used that. Look at acupuncture. Acupuncture is known for thousands of years, and what acupuncture is doing is directing energy along so-called channels in our body, and according to theory of acupuncture, this energy plays, literally speaking with language of our modern science, like software of life. It actually regulates our physiology, not only physiology, it influences our mental and emotional processes also.
Now, it's really interesting, too. I was going to, we explore this here, I remember there was a time when we bought into Sir Isaac Newton's way of looking at the world, which seemed very linear. There was gravity and so forth. And it seemed that we really vibrated into his particular belief in such a way that we figured that was it. Then Einstein comes along and he says, well, there's a lot more to reality than you think. In fact, it's deeper at times, beyond the world that you can see. And it took quite a while before people began to realize, well, you're right, but we seem to be accelerating now our experience of this. What do you see as applications? Because we talk about subtle energy. It's pretty fascinating how, let's just take the world of health and healing. You brought up acupuncture. This day and age, it's beginning to take hold, and the mainstream, for instance, is beginning to realize, well, there must be something pretty valid about the application of acupuncture and the results that it creates, because it's about energy, meridians, and systems in the body. Yet, what was this, 2,000-3,000 years ago, something like this was developed, and it was effective then, but then it was dismissed because for some reason Western medicine stepped in and said, well, let's take a look at this, and from a perspective of Sir Isaac Newton, it doesn't make any sense. Can you kind of elaborate on that for us?
The main reason they denied it was inability of our science to measure the energy which flows in acupuncture meridians. That's why they said it doesn't exist. We cannot measure it. That time, as you said, we believe that we can measure everything. We can, explain everything with equipment which we have. But it's not true. And now we know that this dark matter occupies 96% of the universe. Can you imagine? It means that only 4% of the universe is available to our equipment.
There's an awful lot of space out there.
Yeah, 96%. And this energy is not measurable, and our science admits it. We cannot measure it. It means that it doesn't interact with electrically charged particles in the same way as electromagnetic energy interacts, which allows to measure electromagnetic energy. So, but we see effects, tremendous effects produced by this energy, so how we can deny it? It's a very interesting situation in our science. In Chinese Institute of High Energy Physics, for instance, there were a lot of experiments done with the energy which was directed by Dr. Yang Xing. He is a medical doctor. He is known like a miracle healer. And he is the same time Qigong master. And directing this external Qi, as they call it, he was able to not only heal people, but he was able to choose energy which changed radioactive decay rate. According to our science, radioactive decay rate cannot be changed by anything. Nevertheless, Yang Zin changed radioactive decay rate, which was measured many times. There were 50 experiments, more than 50 experiments, repeatedly demonstrating his ability to change radioactive decay rate. And he could change it, he could increase it or decrease it, which means that with his mind, he could control this energy. It is incredible that this energy somehow listens to what human mind says to it. You know, it is beyond what our science can explain.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know when you talk about, for instance, Qigong, I remember coming across, and I actually seen this, and of course, people would look and say, well, this is nonsense. But anyway, I was looking at this, and I said, no, it can't be, because take a look at, for instance, all solid reality is made up of energy. But for anything that's solid to exist, you have to have, as you were talking about, that 96% space that makes that happen. And I think what's really fascinating is there was a time when I was studying Zen, for instance, and the Japanese style of art is what they do when they decide they're going to paint something, let's say a tree. What they actually paint are the spaces that you see in between the leaves. The space around the tree is what they're actually painting, and that creates the solid reality of a tree. Based on that, I started, for instance, you sit in a room and you realize the only way the room exists in its shape is based on the emptiness, and therefore you have these solid walls, you know, and so it really gets interesting to think of life and looking at it that way. Now, that being said, now in this particular experiment, it showed where there was a patient who had a tumor that was approximately 2 centimeters. Literally laid this person down, and through ultrasound were showing the tumor itself, and he began to use the Qigong energy and literally shrank and dissipated this tumor through the Qigong practice and literally removed the tumor. And I thought, okay, now take a look at that for a minute. The tumor is nothing more than an energy signature of its type that the reality is created, we don't know, maybe by thought, you know, bad health habits, who knows. But the fact that no surgery or no drugs were used, you thought, just imagine, these people have been doing this for quite a long time. Why don't we approach, for instance, healing in that way?
You know, Yang Zin, the same doctor whom I mentioned, demonstrated, and it was published in our American journals, that he was able with his energy to change not only radioactive decay rate, but he was able to change proliferation rate of cancer cells. And as you said, again, if we are looking at this energy as a software of life, as ancient considered it, it is possible to change this program and suppress proliferation of cancer cells and get rid of cancer. And he demonstrated that with this external Qi, he was able to change genes expression in cancer cells. And it was published, but you know, strangely enough, still our science doesn't put attention to it.
Now, what do you think is causing them to do that? I know you mentioned it's because it's really difficult to measure, but what else do you think is going on there that has these people at a stall, if you will, or even at a point of denial?
It's a good psychological question. Yeah, I think that will be subject of many dissertations of future scientists, scientists of psychology. So it's difficult to say, Daniel, but you know, from the beginning of 20th century, when a lot of publications were done. And now the whole book is written about this research with Dr. Yan Zin, including suppression of proliferation of cancer cells and changing of gene expression of cancer cells. Nevertheless, there is no response in our scientific literature. It looks like it doesn't exist at all. And it is puzzle to me also. I don't know how to explain it. Besides, this inertia of scientific minds.
I know a good way too that could possibly be a way for our listeners to look at this is, for instance, not too long ago, my wife brought home a really fascinating movie that is called Anonymous. And in this movie, apparently, and I didn't realize this, but there has been a very long-going debate about the life of Shakespeare and the work that has been created by Shakespeare himself. Now, the debate concerns whether he was really the one that wrote these works.
That's right.
Okay. Now, what's fascinating is this. Think of all the industry that's been created around the work of Shakespeare. You come along and you say, look, we pretty much probably can prove Shakespeare never wrote any of these things. Imagine just how many lives could probably almost be destroyed if you start saying Shakespeare didn't do this. And you find the same thing. There was a Brazilian mathematician. He was about 35 years old when I had met him, and this was back around 2001. And he had written a book called Faster Than the Speed of Light. Now, here was this young Brazilian who was actually beginning to slowly upturn even Einstein's theoretical applications. And science is like, well, no, you're kind of pushing things through too far here. But what was fascinating about interviewing this gentleman was this, is that it talked about how industry sets a foundation in such a way that everybody begins to piggyback their work, and then they begin to make lifestyles and claims and theories and so forth, and that it's hard to really break those things down once they're established.
That's right. It works like a machine which already turned on, and you need to stop it first to change it.
Right. And I take a look at your work, and you're certainly one of those people that just loves to break down foundations and say, no, look, this can be explored, this can be proven, let's go ahead and move forward.
That's right. That's why I decided to find how technologically harness this so-called subtle energy. In modern terms, it's subtle energy. In ancient terms, it's, life force. And it appeared to be possible. I made it, and I have a generator which can generate, record, and reproduce subtle energy patterns.
Now, it's known as vital force technology. For our listeners, describe exactly what this is that you've been able to create.
So, as I said, what it can do, it is based on plasma, which vibrates with different frequencies, and it emits electromagnetic energy along with this immeasurable subtle energy. And it is possible to separate subtle energy from electromagnetic energy. I found a way to record it and reproduce it. And what else we found possible? Of course, we did a lot of experiments, and progressive scientists and doctors helped us with this research for years and years. We already more than 15 years in this area of research, and we have a lot of results confirming, for instance, that this energy influences acupuncture meridians, which means that it is identical to that energy which ancient Chinese called qi. And we found ways to make energies following these acupuncture rules. So it makes it like in not invasive acupuncture. We can infuse it in concentrated trace minerals, for instance, and these energy patterns affect many physiological and psychological functions. and we did experiments in vitro. We did experiments on mice, for instance, in Latvian university. Some progressive scientists in other countries helped us, like in Latvian university. And we observe incredible results produced by these subtle energy patterns.
Now, share some of the particular experiments that you conducted with this harnessing of this technology.
For instance, we showed that specific energetic pattern can change and balance response of autonomic nervous system and help with dealing with stress. And stress is one of the main reasons for diseases. And if you can very fast and effectively balance sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system of people, it can be tremendously helpful in, overcoming this effect of stress. We did experiments on mice in Latvian university, and they showed that it tremendously changed behavior of mice, which means that it's not, placebo effect. And mice were much more brave. They crossed so-called dangerous areas, unlike controlled mice who were not going in that area. Then we did experiments in vitro on cells, and we showed that specifically developed subtle energy pattern can help cells viability even in stressful and poisoned situation. When mitochondrial poison was added to these cells, they, in growth media infused with subtle energy, they felt better than even in non-poison control, which means that this subtle energy helps them to overcome this poisonous effect. We did a lot of experiments with these kind of in vitro experiments, in vivo experiments on human beings, and recently we even showed these experiments were done in Beech Tree Lab in Rhode Island, that specific subtle energy patterns are capable to change genes expression, which kind of confirms this opinion of frontier scientists for a long time, thinking that this subtle energy can affect even genes, genetics. And what is important about it, Daniel, that actually it explains mechanism, at least of one of mechanisms of so-called epigenetics, which is new science. This science, just literally 15 years it's appeared on the scene, which makes a statement that environment affects our life. But how it affects our life? What mechanism of this effect? And it seems that this subtle energy, which is all around us because it's 96% of the universe occupied with this so-called dark matter and dark energy, which is, in my opinion, a subtle energy is just fraction of spectrum of this so-called dark energy. And this energy affects our life. So environment affects our life through subtle energy.
Now, I like what you're saying when you talk about the ability to change genetic expression. Now, for instance, in science, it was thought for many years that your genes were pretty much set, that who you are wasn't entirely your fault. It was the result of, for instance, perhaps your relatives and the generations of your family tree, for instance. Now, for our listeners out there, to put that into a perspective, how often have you heard, for instance, I have a genetic predisposition toward diabetes because diabetes runs in the family. I have a genetic predisposition for cancer because cancer runs in my family. It's almost as though because somehow that message was passed on from one generation to the next, that the reality becomes real due to the belief. Now, what I loved was the work of one Dr. Bruce Lipton, and he even created a book known as The Biology of Belief, which a lot of people out there in the New Age community love to embrace as a way to embrace success, but it seems that in some cases maybe some of these people really didn't read the book as thoroughly to come to understand what he was talking about, and that is exactly what you're saying here. The idea that genetic expression isn't static, but it's very permeating. It can change. And so a good example he used, for instance, let's say that you were born in Southern California. Okay? Well, in that state, it tends to generally be an average of 70 degrees all year round. So, you find yourself running around in shorts and tank tops. Now, the next thing you know, you decide, well, I'm going to pick up and I'm going to move up to the Northwest. Well, the average temperature up in the Northwest drops almost 20 degrees on average, okay? So then you spend, the next few years and you find that your body is beginning to acclimate to this new temperature, and instead of wearing a coat like you began wearing as you moved into this new climate, you begin to find yourself being able to wear shorts and tank tops like you did in California on a 50-degree day. The next generation does the very same thing. They have now adapted, their genes have now adapted to this, and now they're doing it automatically even in colder temperatures. So what he was sharing was how the genes change, just like you're saying, according to the environment. And it becomes fascinating when you realize that we are really a product of our environment. Our life, who we are, is the product of our environment. And with so many messages and media going on today and all this noise, you start to see the genetic expression and a lot of strange maladies. For instance, autism is on the rise. And you start to scratch your head and go, why is this happening? And so what you're saying makes a lot of sense because it's becoming visually measurable.
It's exactly right, Daniel. And it makes the whole sense that if this subtle energy is software of a process, gene, it is just a recording. It is a record from previous generation, let's say. But will this record will be played or will not be played depends on this subtle energy program. And if you can find a program which stops this gene from expression, or at least slow down this expression, then situation will be quite different. And disease which is recorded from previous generation will not appear. And a lot of things can be explained with considering this subtle energy effect. And by the way, what you mentioned, it's very important that a lot of new technologies changes environment. For instance, electromagnetic pollution. We all of us have cell phones, we have Wi-Fi, everywhere, and what it does to environment. It's a very good question. What we showed in experiments which were done in Irvine University with Dr. Joy Jones, who passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, we showed that environmental energetic pollution is tremendously affects healing effect. He did experiments with cells damaged by gamma radiation, and he showed in previous experiments that they can be restored with help of healers who radiate some immeasurable energy, Qigong healers. And then we repeated the same experiments with energy, subtle energy, produced by my technology. But we found that depending on what lab he is doing it, in a lab where he did experiments, where people did experiments with dissecting animals, and a lot of equipment was there, it was definitely energetically polluted, he couldn't get the same effect as an energetically pure lab. So for that reason, we developed specific energetic pattern, which was cleaning environment in that lab. And, from zero success in that lab, we immediately jumped to about 70% success, which means that energetic environment can tremendously affect result of healing.
So now, have you conducted experiments or, let's say, therapy on human subjects?
We are working with many doctors, alternative doctors and progressive doctors in many countries, and of course we have a lot of evidence of subtle energy positive effects. For instance, we have literally thousands examples of heart rate variability tests, which shows how sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and cardiovascular system respond to subtle energy. And it is very incredible results. And what is interesting, Daniel, that actually any healing modalities can be enhanced with the help of subtle energy.
Now, I know the biggest thing that especially we see here in America is this big fight and war against cancer. Now, I think the first thing we should do is eliminate the fact that it's a war on cancer. Just, when you think about the power of words, for instance, and I know that you're familiar with the work of one Dr. Masaru Emoto, who was featured in the movie, for our listeners, in the movie What the Bleep, where he wrote words on a glass of water, and then he conducted the experiment to show how words, for instance, have that subtle energy you're talking about to actually change the expression of the crystals of water when frozen. When you put love on the glass, for instance, you had beautiful, symmetric, snowflakes, for instance. But when you put things like war or hate, you have these erratic, fractured patterns, like nasty chaos. And as I was mentioning earlier, with all the noise we have in the world, and we take a look, for instance, at this war on terror that we seem to be perpetually embroiled in. I was just recently watching a television host who's doing a series now on, I guess it's the freedom of speech. Where do we draw the lines and the barriers in that? And what was interesting as I was listening to this symposium, if you will, as he interviewed three people, and they were just talking about this idea of the freedom of speech and the responsibility behind it, as I started wondering, I wonder if this terrorist hasn't become the words we use that creates the reality that's beginning to appear as this phantom terrorist that we're chasing around to keep everybody in fear. It just doesn't seem like a very fun world to live in.
It's very interesting. It has connection with that topic we discussed, how human mind affects this subtle energy, and through subtle energy it affects processes in the physical world. And it is already scientifically proven in these Chinese experiments that, and not only in their experiments, we also did some experiments with creating, like a Yury Kronn, we created specific energy patterns with human intent for instance, influence specific group of genes. And we observed changes in this specific group of genes. So it means that definitely there is a very deep connection between how we think and how we program this subtle energy and how it influences us back and creates our reality, if you wish. Of course, it's a very sophisticated process, and a lot of research should be done in this direction, but in principle, it's absolutely obvious now that, yes, with our thoughts, we influence our reality.
Now, I'm going to go ahead on a bold stretch here because I'm understanding that as you've been able to harness the technology of subtle energy, that you're able to actually understand energy signatures and actually change those frequencies, meaning that's the best word I could think of, Would that be a correct way of saying that?
Subtle energy is characterized much more by much more parameters than just frequency. Like Chinese knew that this energy, Qi energy they call it, has so-called 5 elemental properties: water, fire, wood, earth, and metal. And what does it mean? It means that it has much more characteristics, much more properties. It's much more sophisticated than electromagnetic energy. Of course, it is vibration, so it has some frequency of vibration, repetition rate of vibration, but it has much more subtle characteristics which they very, very accurately, I would say, described with these terms, fire, wood, and metal, and so on, because these properties describe how these different energetic patterns interact with each other in human body. That's why they developed this 5 elemental system, which is very useful in acupuncture. So, it is answering your questions, yes and no. There is such a characteristic as a frequency of vibration of subtle energy, but at the same time, there are much more characteristics of that. And what our technology can do, it can develop specific energetic patterns with these characteristics, let's say with properties of wood, so-called, property of fire, and so on.
Now, the reason I was trying to position this was because I for some reason, I was thinking of an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. We all love science fiction because it shows us possibilities that probably even exist now, and when we can see them, then we believe them, so to speak. But there was an episode in this particular one where somehow they found 3 people from Earth's past. And, and it's very gray, how the episode unfolded, but there was one that really stood out for me. One of them happened to be this rich Texas guy who apparently really loved his alcohol. And he had drank to a point where, as he had said, and I never forgot this, he says, "Yeah, I remember the doctors told me my liver was about to explode." That's how much drinking he did. But apparently, the crew of the Enterprise, the doctor, they had a technology. They just kind of scanned over his liver and literally repaired it 100%. Now think about that. Cirrhosis of the liver, especially for people who really indulge in their alcoholic drinks or however it is one of those things that, once it's there, it's scarred, it's done, but yet they were able to repair the liver completely. And I thought, wow, how are they able to do this? There wasn't any operation, anything like that. It was just some sort of a tool that they waved over that area, and it was repaired. And I thought, okay, how does something like that work, and is it possible with what we're talking about here today? For instance, we look at, as I was mentioning, the war on cancer. Well, cancer is an energetic expression. So my question is, would you be able to harness this subtle energy, and I use the word frequency because I couldn't think of a better word, to kind of fine-tune, understand its energy signature, kind of dial in, and then change that frequency altogether, and in a non-invasive way, eliminate it altogether?
That's a good question, and it's a matter for huge and long-term research, of course, because what is interesting, as we already discussed, we cannot measure directly this energy, which means that we cannot, let's say, measure and say, oh, yeah, this is frequency, and this is another frequency, let's try this frequency. We cannot do it. Okay. What we can do, we can create different energy patterns, and as I said, I developed these methods based on ancient Chinese acupuncture medicine and some other methods, and methods which we found along the way of our research. Yeah, we can create, what needs to be done, Daniel? A lot of experiments, like we created this particular energy pattern. We see that in vitro it suppresses, let's say, proliferation of cancer cells. But to put it in practice, we need to do a lot of additional experiments to see what else it's doing. Is it totally safe? Well, as always in medicine. So unfortunately, it needs a lot of resources, and frontier science still don't have these resources. Of course, we are very limited in what we can experiment with, and in principle, yes, it looks like it's possible because if it's really software of life, if you find right software, right program, and it will do the job. But how to find this program, how to find these proper energy patterns? We need, as I said, for that a lot of experimentation, and unfortunately, it's not done yet. It's a big job for future scientists, and I hope that our mainstream science finally will come up with this, opinion that yes, we need to investigate it.
Well, I really like to hear that this actually can enhance the effectiveness of remedies, and I know one application I was thinking of is when we think about how, when we eat, for instance, we eat to definitely gain energy, and we need that energy, of course, to repair and to replace and to vibrate at higher frequencies. But it seems, as we have developed, especially in the West, the fast food diet, we kind of eat a lot of dead, low-energy food, and we wonder why we're so sluggish and so tired all the time. But you can imagine something like what we're talking about here with subtle energy, to be able to even harness this in such a way that we can even change the expression or the vibrational energy of our nutrition.
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay. And what that really means to an individual when they begin to vibrate at that higher energetic frequency, it's pretty phenomenal that we might be able to even tap into more ability to use more of our brain power, for instance.
Well, that's absolutely possible. What we showed, and we experimentally proved it, that when we infuse with specific energetic patterns, let's say some remedy, it starts affecting human being much more successfully. And of course, if we will find these software programs, we can change how, let's say, nutrition affects us. And we infused these specific energetic patterns in, let's say, supplements. And supplements work much faster and much better.
It's such a fascinating frontier, and I really hope that it develops at a particular pace where people can begin to see, we hear a lot, for instance, this day and age, about the power of intention. And as I hear about, and you're explaining, about this subtle energy, that there may even be a time, and it's certainly at times been talked about, that you might be able to even heal people in a non-local way. In other words, you don't have to be in the same room. And I know in Qigong, I've actually talked with people here on the program that say they've been able to do that very thing. I don't have to be there in front of you to do the healing.
Experiments with Dr. Yang Zin, which I mentioned already several times, were done not only on the same place. They were done, including with changing radioactive decay rates, on a distance up to 2,000 kilometers.
My goodness.
Yeah, and it's published. And it is scientifically proved. But as I said, unfortunately, our mainstream science still doesn't pay attention to it. But it's pretty well known in many experiments. These influences were produced by people on a distance. And in experiments of Dr. Joy Jones, whom I also mentioned, on healing cells damaged by gamma radiation, he did report on several conferences about it. He was able to demonstrate that they did this healing on distance.
Yeah, and it's just such an amazing thing. For instance, again, when people might say, well, this kind of sounds more like science fiction than science. We can go back to, again, the power of words. Isn't it amazing that, for instance, when you fall in love, that you can still feel if you happen to leave the person you're in love with? Let's say, you leave from, I'm up in the Pacific Northwest, and you leave to the Soviet Union. You can still feel from that distance that love. Or, for instance, we've heard about the anomaly of twins, how when one feels bad in one area, the other one can be 10,000 miles away and feel at that very moment that same thing. It's hard to really deny, whether you can measure that or not, that exists.
That's exactly right. And there are a lot of confirmation, and now we have, as I said, scientific confirmation of it. These experiments, when radioactive decay rate is changed on a 2,000-kilometer distance, it signifies that this is real. It's not just our imagination. And there's a lot of experiments which are done now and recorded and published, which confirm this, that, it means that our mind continuously interacts with, environment, with this energetic environment. And there is no distance in that world for some reason. We don't know how it happens, but it's just experimental fact. And it, by the way, indicates how important for us to discipline our mind and do this kind of techniques like meditation. And we are working with people who are incredibly disciplined and powerful, and they create these energetic patterns which we infuse into, let's say, this growth media of cells, and we can observe effect. And it's tremendous effect.
Now, here's one. I've actually had two different guests on this program here, and they were talking about how they are able to heal people simply by having a photograph, because, as one described it, the photograph is really a holographic image of who you are, even though it's on a piece of printed paper, if you will, that your actual energy signature is there as a quantum hologram. And the way he described it is, just picture if you could actually go as deep as you could into this picture of yourself, this photograph, and what you see are billions of miniature yous that make up this hologram of this larger you. That they're able to use that energy signature and actually heal people again in a non-local way. Now, apparently they've been able to do this, and they've had people that are submitting photographs and it works, but I know there are people scratching their heads saying, well, I don't know, I think surgery is still a better way to go. But it's really amazing. It's just like physics itself. The more we seem to explore it, the more elusive it becomes, but then at the same time, the more real it becomes, because it kind of wants us to chase it to figure it out.
And that's exactly right.
And it's sort of like the Hindu philosophy of what is known as Lila, which is God likes to play hide-and-go-seek. And here, you've got this superconductor, I believe, that's over in Sweden, and they're literally looking for that God particle.
It's a very complicated question, of course. Our reality is much more sophisticated than just what we know about physical world. And we see that in that realm of subtle energies, we have enormous amount of, I would say, energy patterns which are very different in how they affect us and the environment and everything around. So it is a very sophisticated picture, and we don't have instruments except human instruments for investigating this reality. And that's why developing human ability to feel this energy and work with this energy, combined with possibilities to use technology, modern technology for that, can bring absolutely incredible results in the future, and I strongly believe in it.
And when you take a look at your website, which we're going to give our listeners here in just a moment, You know, I'm looking at some of the areas that you're researching that I find fascinating. First of all, there's agricultural research.
Right.
Now, there's a fascinating book out there. I think it's called The Secrets of Plants or something like that.
Secret Life of Plants.
The Secret Life of Plants.
Right.
I started reading this, and I was just like, my goodness, this is just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You could put a plant on the moon, and it knows exactly what you're thinking if you were the one that was raising it. They have psychic ability. Now, anybody who has what they call, quote, the green thumb understands how true this is. The plant knows that when you want to take care of it, it knows when you could care less. And they've actually conducted experiments where, you know, you'd have a plant, for instance, let's just say it's something that you're going to clip a leaf off, for instance. That plant sort of shrivels knowing, hey, you're about to come and do this to me, or it has a brother that it noticed that did it and thinks, you know, I'm going to be next. And an interesting idea on that, I remember taking my children, for instance, locally there was a place where you could look at reptiles, actually buy reptiles. You know, and it was sad to see this sometimes, where they have these rats that would be put inside of a python cage, and you just seen them shrunk over the corner. They just knew the end was near. You know, so the idea of psychic ability and so forth, you know, and I know it's kind of off track with agricultural research, but the idea that the subtle energy, I mean, there's just something going on where we're in tune. We know these things.
But subtle energy, in my opinion, is a mechanism of transferring this information between plant and human, between human and human, you know. That opens possibility to, I would say, demystify this. If we find mechanism of interaction, then it is just matter of research to find laws of this interaction, instead of say, oh, it's something, you know, something mystical. All mystics is just laws which we don't know yet. And if we find these laws, we can research it, whether with human instruments, whether with technology, whatever is appropriate.
It's all really fascinating, and I know that you're probably yielding a lot of results, and pretty soon, hopefully, we can get the scientific community that wants to stay solid in the old ways of thinking to move forward, because certainly it's going to happen whether they try to hold it up or not, isn't it?
That's right.
And what is that website that people can find out more about what we're talking about here today?
Oh, this is our website. First of all, it's about our technology. It's vitalforcetechnology.com.
vitalforcetechnology.com. Dr.
Right.
Yury Kronn, I want to thank you, first of all, for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today. I mean, there's so much we can explore and talk about here today. Unfortunately, we just have an hour. But I think Vital Force Technology is going to find a way to expand that hour into infinity, I'm sure.
I hope you're right.
Thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners. You can find out more, like I said, by visiting vitalforcetechnology.com. We're also going to set up a link on our website at beyond50radio.com as well, and we welcome your comments and any questions that you may have. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.